I had been working as a nurse across multiple hospitals and care facilities, so dealing with elderly patients was nothing new to me. Before my current job, I took a position at a geriatric hospital, about 30 minutes from my house. At the time, I had only been there for a couple of weeks, and although I didn't know it yet, one particular night would end up being one of my last shifts there. I was working the graveyard shift, already running on almost no sleep. That night, I was assigned to the Alzheimer's ward. The patients there seemed to really like me. Being a young woman in my 20s, I think my presence brought them some comfort. Many of them spent their days lost in fragments of memory, drifting between past and present, and having someone there with them, even briefly, seemed to ground them in reality. I was responsible for several patients that night, but one stood out more than the others. Her name was Lena. It was my first time taking care of her, and from the moment my shift began, she seemed distressed. Every time I entered her room, she would tell me about the voices she kept hearing, and about a man dressed in black who stood in the corner of the room watching her. Her roommate had actually requested to be moved before my shift started because Lena's behavior was disturbing her. Despite everything, Lena herself was kind. She would smile whenever I came in, though she was very forgetful and often seemed lost. By around 11 p.m., most of the patients were asleep, but Lena wasn't. She kept calling me back into the room, frightened by what she was hearing and seeing. I have to admit, it started to get under my skin. I believed that, in her mind, these things were real, and I felt sympathy for her. It must have been terrifying. Still, I tried to calm her down the best I could. I held her hands, spoke softly, and reassured her that she wasn't alone, that I was nearby if she needed anything. Eventually, it seemed to help. She relaxed, and the next time I checked on her, she was asleep. Once the ward quieted down, the night slowed to a crawl. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. A couple of hours later, I was in the linen room, restocking my cart. It was a small, silent space, and I had the door closed. That's why I immediately noticed when I heard a noise behind me. I turned, but there was nothing there. Assuming I had imagined it, I went back to what I was doing. Then suddenly I felt something, clear as day, a hand on my shoulder. It wasn't light or accidental. It felt firm, like someone had actually grabbed me. I froze. I looked at my shoulder, expecting to see someone standing behind me, but there was no one there. Panicking, I stepped out into the hallway and looked around. It was completely empty. No nurses, no patients, nothing. Just silence. I didn't know what else to do, so I went back inside and forced myself to keep working. When I finished restocking, I turned toward the door, and that's when I saw him. Through the small glass window in the door, a man dressed entirely in black was standing on the other side, staring directly at me. He was smiling. I collapsed to the floor, screaming. My heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. The man didn't move at first. He just stood there, smiling. Then, suddenly, he stepped out of view. Seconds later, the door opened, and another nurse rushed in to help me up. I was hysterical, barely able to speak. I asked her if she had seen the man. She looked confused. "What man?" she asked. "There's no one here. We checked every room in the ward, but there was no sign of anyone matching that description. No one dressed in black, no one out of place. My screams had woken Lena." When I went into her room, she immediately started talking about the voices again. This time, she mentioned hearing screams, my screams, though she didn't know they were mine. Trying to steady myself, I asked her what the man she kept seeing looked like, and if he was smiling. She looked at me, and for the first time that night, her expression changed. her eyes focused in a way I hadn't seen before. Then she asked me, quietly, "How did you know?" My heart skipped. Before I could respond, she began screaming, louder than before, begging to be taken out of the room, saying he was coming for her. Other nurses rushed in to calm her down, and I was reassigned to a different ward for the rest of the night. Not long after, I went home early. I was too shaken to continue. The next day, I spoke to the head nurse and told her that my next shift would be my last. The experience had completely unsettled me, and I didn't feel safe in that building anymore. She was understanding, and I left on as good terms as possible. I've never been diagnosed with anything, and I've never experienced hallucinations before. I understand how powerful sleep deprivation can be, but this felt like something beyond that. The sensation of that hand on my shoulder, the image of that man behind the glass door, and the fact that his appearance matched exactly what Lena had been describing all night. It's something I still can't explain, and I can only hope it was something that will never happen again. About 3 years ago, I contracted bacterial meningitis. I was living in South Florida at the time, and as far as I knew, there wasn't any outbreak happening, so I never really understood how I got it or where it came from. It started with intense symptoms, severe headaches, confusion, extreme fatigue, nausea, and a complete loss of appetite. But it wasn't until the hallucinations began that I realized something was seriously wrong. One day, while I was lying in bed, sick, and my husband was at work, I heard a child's voice from downstairs call out, "Mom." That immediately confused me, because we don't have any children. Despite how weak I felt, I forced myself out of bed and went toward the stairs, calling out my husband's name. Of course, there was no answer. He wasn't even home. The effort made my headache worse, so I went back to bed. Not long after, I heard the voice again. This time it simply said, "Hello." That's when panic really set in. I grabbed my phone and called my husband, telling him I was hearing a child's voice in the house, and that I thought I might be hallucinating. Hearing how distressed I was, he immediately left work to come get me and take me to the hospital. While I was waiting for him, I tried to get dressed, but I suddenly felt the urge to vomit and ran to the bathroom. As I was throwing up, I heard another voice just outside the bathroom door. I couldn't make out exactly what it said, and I couldn't tell if it was the same voice as before, but it only made me feel like I was completely losing my mind. I wasn't diagnosed until I reached the hospital, where doctors quickly realized how serious my condition was. They told me that untreated bacterial meningitis can be extremely dangerous, even fatal. When I mentioned the hallucinations, they said it was unusual but not unheard of. I was immediately given antibiotics through an IV, and the doctor later told me I was lucky I had come in when I did. Waiting any longer could have led to permanent damage or worse. My husband stayed with me for a few hours, but I was told I would need to remain in the hospital for several days due to the severity of my condition. Around 10 that night, he left to go home. Since he had work the next day, the nurse told me to call her if I needed anything. Even though I still felt terrible, I fell asleep fairly quickly. At some point during the night, I had what felt like an incredibly vivid dream. In it, my ex-husband was standing beside my hospital bed, looking down at me. He was talking, saying terrible things about my current husband. At one point, he patted my head and said he was glad I was okay, and that he had come as soon as he saw my husband leave. Then his tone shifted, and he started ranting about how much he despised my husband and how he wanted to kill him. He kept touching my forehead before eventually leaving the room. I've had nightmares about my ex before due to how toxic and abusive our marriage was, so I assumed it was just another bad dream. When I woke up in the middle of the night, I felt disoriented and lightheaded. I noticed that a chair had been pulled up right next to my bed, even though it hadn't been there when my husband left. Still, half asleep, I didn't think much of it and drifted off again. The next morning, a nurse came into the room, and I told her about the strange, vivid dream I had. She laughed at first and casually said that it wasn't a dream, that my cousin had come to visit me the night before. That immediately confused me. I told her I didn't have any cousins living in the state. Her expression changed, and she said that someone who identified himself as my cousin David had visited late that night. David was my ex-husband's name. After I explained the situation more clearly, the nurse called in a doctor. He told me that the antibiotics combined with my condition could have caused delirium, making it difficult to distinguish between sleep and reality. According to him, it was possible that I had imagined or misinterpreted what happened. Later, I called my husband and told him everything. He was both concerned and angry, and came back to stay with me that evening. During the day, I also texted David, demanding to know why he had come to see me and how he even knew I was in the hospital. My message was delivered, but he didn't respond right away. I sent another message, telling him I had heard everything he said, and warning him that I would involve the police. A few minutes later, he replied. He denied making any threats, and said he had only come to check on me after hearing what had happened. He insisted that I must have imagined the rest while I was half asleep. I told him to stay out of my life or I would take further action. After that, he never responded again. I never told my husband about the threats I thought I heard that night. Between the hallucinations I had already experienced and the effects of the medication, I couldn't be sure what was real and what wasn't. It's possible that my mind filled in things that were never actually said, but even now, I can't say that with complete certainty. I stayed in the hospital for several more days and was eventually discharged the following week. Even after recovering, that experience stayed with me, not just because of how serious the illness was, but because of how real everything had felt in those moments where I couldn't trust my own mind. It was New Year's Eve of 2016, and my girlfriend and I were hosting a party at my condo. I had invited around 30 people and told everyone they could bring friends, as long as they were respectful of the place. Earlier that evening, while we were setting everything up, we started noticing something strange. Small things kept going missing, like the TV remote, her bag, or other items we needed at the moment, and then a few minutes later they would reappear in places we had already checked. At first, we thought we were just being forgetful or accidentally moving things without realizing it, so we ignored it and continued preparing for the party. Around 9 to 10 p.m., guests started arriving. Since many people had brought friends, there were several unfamiliar faces in the crowd. To be cautious, I had already set up surveillance cameras in rooms where we kept valuables, like the living room and near the bedrooms. Even after everyone had arrived, things still kept disappearing. At one point, I wanted to show my friends a new pair of shoes my girlfriend had given me for Christmas, but I couldn't find them anywhere. I also noticed that my bedroom window was open, which seemed odd, but I assumed it was just part of the chaos of hosting a party. As midnight approached, everyone gathered around the TV to watch the ball drop. While looking around the room, I noticed a tall man wearing a black trench coat standing near the wall opposite the TV. He seemed out of place, quietly looking down as if he was doing something near the couch. I was about to ask my friend Alan if he knew who the man was, but the countdown began, and everyone's attention shifted to celebrating the new year. When the cheering, hugs, and celebrations settled, I realized that the man was no longer in the room. When I casually asked someone about him, they told me he was Tom's friend, so I didn't think much of it. Later, one of my friend's girlfriends came downstairs and mentioned that the man in the trench coat had been in the bathroom for a long time and wasn't coming out. I reassured her that he was supposedly Tom's friend and suggested she use another bathroom. As the night went on, the party began to wind down, and by around 2 a.m., most of the guests had left. My girlfriend and I decided to quickly check if anything important was missing before going to bed. That was when we realized her bag was completely gone, along with some of my expensive watches. We immediately went to the bedroom to check the surveillance footage. As we fast-forwarded through the recordings, we eventually spotted the man in the trench coat. He was seen entering the guest bedroom and going through our belongings. I paused the footage, feeling a surge of anger, and quickly clipped a short segment to send to Tom. I texted him, accusing his friend of stealing from us. However, Tom responded with confusion, saying he didn't recognize the person at all. After sending him the video, he insisted again that he had no idea who the man was. At that point, I started messaging other friends who had attended the party, asking if anyone knew the man. One by one, they all replied that they had never seen him before. Growing increasingly uneasy, my girlfriend and I returned to the footage and continued watching. We saw the man enter our bedroom, open the window, and begin dropping our belongings outside, including my girlfriend's bag. Suddenly, he seemed to react as if he had heard something, and then he quickly crawled under the bed. We froze as we watched, unable to process what we were seeing. We fast-forwarded further through the footage, but he never came out from under the bed. Slowly, we looked down at the bed we were sitting on, realizing that the same man could still be underneath us. My girlfriend was on the verge of screaming, so I covered her mouth and whispered that we needed to run. However, she let out a cry, and I immediately told her to run. We rushed out of the room, and just before slamming the door, I glanced under the bed and saw him staring back at me. We locked ourselves in the kitchen, grabbed knives for protection, and called the police. They arrived within minutes, but by the time they searched the condo, the man had already escaped. The bedroom window was open again, and it was clear that he had used it to get away. We later handed over the footage to the police, who reviewed it and captured a clear image of his face. Despite their efforts, the man was never identified or found. The entire experience left us shaken, and even now, the memory of that night, and the moment we realized he was under the bed with us, remains impossible to forget. I'm going to tell you about my first boyfriend, the boy who gave me my first kiss, and also my first experience with abuse. At the time, I was young and didn't really understand what a healthy relationship looked like. In the beginning, everything seemed perfect. He was attentive, always checking on me, always wanting to be around me. He acted protective, and back then, I thought that meant he really cared. For the first few months, I felt special, like I mattered to someone in a way I hadn't experienced before. But around the 5th month, something started to feel off. It wasn't anything obvious at first, just small moments where my instincts told me something wasn't right. I remember one particular day clearly. He had taken me on a roller skating date, and everything seemed normal at first. We laughed, skated around, and eventually sat down to take a break. That's when 2 of his friends showed up. The moment they approached, his entire demeanor changed. The warmth in his face disappeared, replaced by something cold and unsettling. The way he looked at me suddenly felt unsafe. Then, in front of them, he told me to kiss him, with tongue. I froze. I told him I wasn't ready for that, especially not in front of other people. I tried to say it calmly, hoping he would understand. But he didn't. Instead, he grabbed my face and forced his tongue into my mouth. I remember the shock more than anything else. I was small, but somehow I managed to push him away just enough to break free. I ran, straight toward a more crowded part of the skating rink. My heart was racing, and I told him to stay away from me while I called my mom to pick me up. When I got into the car, I didn't say anything about what had happened. I was confused, embarrassed, and honestly still trying to process it. I was young, and part of me was afraid of getting in trouble just for being in that situation. So instead, I stayed quiet and decided to avoid him at school while I figured out how I felt. For about a week, I managed to stay away from him. Then one day, he approached me again while I was standing with a group of friends. I didn't even notice he was there until he was right next to me. Being that close to him again made me instantly anxious. He started talking like nothing had happened, just casual, meaningless conversation. I didn't engage much, and I think he noticed. That's when his mood shifted again, just like before. He looked at me with this intense disgust, like I had done something wrong. I was holding one of those old portable CD players at the time, and out of nowhere he grabbed it from my hands and tried to shove it into his bag. I yelled at him to give it back and tried to pull it away. That's when he punched me in the face, hard enough to knock me to the ground. I remember the shock, the pain, and then the tears. Everything happened so fast. Teachers got involved, and we were both sent to the principal's office. His father was a well-known football coach in the community, and because of that, he managed to avoid serious consequences. He only got detention. That was it. After that, we didn't see much of each other, and eventually we went to different high schools, which I was incredibly grateful for. It felt like I could finally move on. Then, during my sophomore year, I ran into him again, completely by accident. I was in the drive-thru at Taco Bell, about to pay, when I looked up and realized he was the cashier. We made eye contact, and my stomach dropped. I pretended not to recognize him and rushed through the interaction as quickly as I could before driving away. I thought that would be the end of it. But later, he found me on Facebook and messaged me. The message was awkward and unsettling, like nothing had ever happened between us. He even tried to flirt, mentioning that he thought he saw me at Taco Bell and asking for pictures. Reading it made my skin crawl. I blocked him immediately and told my sister about it because I needed someone to know. At the time, I tried to laugh it off and move on with my life. I dated better people, stayed away from trouble, and put that part of my past behind me. I didn't think much about him after that, until recently. My sister sent me a news article, and when I opened it, I saw his face. My first boyfriend. The same person. According to the report, he had attacked someone with a weapon at a public venue after they tried to defend a woman he was assaulting. Reading it made my chest feel tight. It had been nearly 10 years since we dated, but suddenly everything came rushing back. The comments under the article mentioned that he had a history of violence, especially toward women. Assault, stalking, things that made my stomach turn. And in that moment, I realized something that still unsettles me. I had been close to someone truly dangerous, and I didn't fully understand it at the time. I can't predict the future, and I didn't know what he would become. But looking back, the signs were already there. The control, the anger, the lack of boundaries. It was all there from the beginning. It's a strange and chilling feeling to realize how people like that can pass through your life without you fully seeing the danger until much later. The thought that things could have gone worse stays with me. All I know is this: I got out when I did, and I truly hope I never cross paths with him again. Emily lived in a small, quiet town where life moved at a predictable pace, and over time, She found herself craving something different. One evening, out of boredom more than anything else, she decided to try online dating and downloaded Tinder. She began swiping through profile after profile, half interested, until one suddenly stood out. The man's name was James. His picture showed a handsome face, piercing blue eyes, and a subtle, confident smile that seemed almost too perfect. His bio was short, but oddly compelling. Looking for an adventure? Swipe right. Feeling a spark of curiosity, Emily swiped right, not expecting much. But within seconds, they matched. Almost immediately, James sent her a message asking if she would be interested in a late-night walk in the nearby woods, a place people often claimed was haunted. The idea was unusual, even a little unsettling, yet it excited her in a way she couldn't quite explain. Without giving herself too much time to reconsider, she agreed to meet him there in an hour. By the time the clock struck midnight, Emily found herself standing at the entrance of the woods, the darkness stretching endlessly before her. James was already there, leaning casually against a tree as if he had been waiting for a while. When he greeted her, his tone was calm, but there was something about his presence that felt slightly off, something she couldn't immediately define. Still, she ignored the feeling, convincing herself it was just nerves. Together, they began walking deeper into the forest. With each step, the outside world seemed to fade away, replaced by an unsettling silence, broken only by the sound of their footsteps. The trees grew denser, blocking out most of the moonlight and casting long, shifting shadows across their path. After a while, Emily began to notice faint whispers and the soft rustling of leaves, even though the air was still. When she asked James if he could hear it too, he simply smiled and told her the spirits of the woods had started to notice them. Before she could respond, a sudden, icy gust of wind rushed past them, instantly knocking out their flashlights and plunging everything into complete darkness. Panic surged through her as she reached out for him, calling his name. But there was no answer. It was as if he had disappeared entirely. Now alone, Emily stumbled blindly through the forest, her breath uneven and her heart pounding loudly in her ears. The darkness felt suffocating, and the strange sounds around her seemed to grow closer, more deliberate, as though something was circling her. The whispers became clearer, almost forming words, brushing against her mind in a way that made her feel watched. Then, suddenly, a voice called her name from the darkness. Low, cold, and unmistakably close. She froze in place, unable to move, her fear rooting her to the ground. Slowly she turned, and that's when she saw them, a pair of glowing red eyes staring directly at her from the blackness. Instinct took over, and she tried to run. But before she could take more than a step, something unseen grabbed hold of her, tightening around her arms and body. She struggled desperately, but the grip only grew stronger. The voice returned, louder now, echoing with a chilling, almost amused tone, telling her she should never have come and that she would never leave. Her screams pierced the silence, desperate and raw, but no one was there to hear them. The forest seemed to absorb everything, her voice, her fear, and finally, her existence itself, until nothing remained but silence. The following morning, a hiker happened to pass by the entrance of the woods. Curious about the place, he decided to explore a little, unaware of what had taken place just hours before. As he walked deeper along the same path, something caught his eye, a faint glimmer lying on the ground. He approached cautiously and discovered a phone. When he picked it up, the screen lit his face, revealing an open Tinder conversation. The name James was still visible at the top, A cold shiver ran down his spine as he looked around, realizing there was no sign of anyone nearby. The forest stood still, quiet and indifferent, as though nothing had ever happened. From that day on, stories about the woods spread more widely, and locals began warning others to stay away. People spoke of the place in hushed voices, recalling the story of a young woman who had gone there in search of adventure and was never seen again.
I'm a gay man of 32 and living in Southern Oregon. I have a rather large following on my nature photography Instagram and Twitter. Having a large follower count, and even sometimes a modest size count, you encounter people who push the limits into ranges that are rather inappropriate. I've had my fair share of creeps who push the limit. Most of them don't faze me. It's easy to block people and ignore them as well, and usually after a short period of time they seem to piss off. Except for one guy. I received a message one morning from a guy in Colorado. He was 24 or 25, and he seemed rather nice. He messaged me with the usual, "Hey, how you doing?" Being a down-to-earth person, I always try and respond and ask the same. Though, with the amount of messages, I cannot continue conversations with everyone, or I'd never get off the phone. But I did try my best. Usually the messages are friendly-natured or oriented quite nicely, and the occasional flirt. But after this guy got a reply from me about how I was doing, he jumped right in. "You're really hot. Where do you live? I want to know about you." I responded in a friendly capacity, saying thank you and that I was from the Pacific Northwest, keeping it vague. The conversation then changed even further. "I'd like to meet you. When can I meet you? We could be boyfriends." Then it happened, like it always does. "So how big's your member? Are you a top or bottom? Do you like being dominated?" Being more interested in personality first, I read his message but didn't reply. I wasn't really interested anyway. I looked over his profile, and there were little things that he would post that made me feel like I wouldn't feel comfortable talking to him, aside from him coming on really strong. Being this was on Twitter and I didn't reply, I didn't believe they sent red receipts, and I figured he'd just get the hint. A day went by, and he messaged me a few more times with more live comments. I'll admit, my Twitter is not safe for work, so I kind of expected it, and I responded him telling him thank you for the compliments, but I didn't answer his questions about the location. Again, I kept everything short and vague, and then stopped responding altogether. After a few days, he messaged me, "Are you ignoring me?" I mean, it was kind of obvious I wasn't responding, and still posting on my social media sites frequently. I eventually responded that I didn't feel comfortable with the conversation approaching, and that I don't give out my location and such. He clearly responded, rather offended, "Okay, whatever," so I blocked him. Later that night, the day I had blocked him, I got a message from another account, just random letters with the username with no posts. The message went as follows: "Why the hell did you block me? I just wanted to get with you. You're disgusting. Unblock me or you'll regret you ever did." Screw this noise, I blocked that profile too, without responding. He then sent me messages on Instagram, and using my email from my Instagram contact button emails me too. The messages were along the lines of, "I love you, unblock me or you'll regret this, I'm going to end my life," or that he would end mine. I reported these messages to Instagram, to Twitter, blocked him, took screenshots of the messages, and didn't respond to the email with the same vulgar content. He messaged me from yet more accounts telling me that he has all of my photos from IG and Twitter, and that he was going to use them to catfish people on Grindr, and that I would regret blocking him. He sends me several Grindr profiles he's created with my pictures. I talked to a friend of mine who's an attorney, and he wrote up a legal statement to send to him, "You cannot legally use my photos to impersonate me, I will press charges, etc." And I sent them to him, on yet another profile he is harassing me on. The long legal-sounding warning message that he needs to cease his actions immediately, and he responded with, "Go ahead, have fun, I'm having fun on Grindr." Then the messages got darker. He messaged me the next day, I'll kill you. I promise you that. And another message, I know where you live. Sending me a Google Street photo of my previous address and my grandparents' house. The messages continued, I'll hunt you down. I'll kill you. But first I'll have some fun with you for a good long time. Then I'll chop you up into little pieces. I'd had enough. Being a stalker asshole is one thing. Ignoring the warning, cease and desist, and impersonating me and threatening me is another. I called the local police department from his area, and he used his, what I assumed to be real, photos on his profiles, and I was able to find him on Facebook, although it may not have been his real name and photos, considering he had dozens of Instagrams and Facebook profiles with his name and the same photo, but with different info on each, to the tune of I'm a former Marine on one, I work with the US Marshal Service on another, etc. Upon contacting the local Colorado Police Department from his area that he located himself, being from in his messages and profiles, the lady on the line told me there's not much they can do, as the jurisdiction would be the place the crime is committed in, my state and area, not where he is committing the crimes from. She then told me to contact my authorities and good luck. I proceed to file a police report with my local sheriff's office here in the county of Oregon, but after a few months, have yet to even receive a response. Even after calling now, they state their cases are backed up due to COVID. He harassed me for a few more months and I have documented it all, and I still to this day receive dozens of messages of people claiming someone is using my photos to catfish, all around the country, on Grindr.
I'm not going to lie, I've been afraid of mirrors since I was 8. I think it all started with me watching a movie of something coming out of a mirror, but I can't be sure. Even at my grandmother's house in southern Ohio, the broken dolls and movements in the shadows couldn't compare to my single, terrifying fear of mirrors. I remember running in and out of the bathroom, washing my hands with my face so close to the water that it almost naturally cleaned my face. My father used to make fun of me for being afraid of my reflection, but I didn't care. I also remember a time when me and my friend were obsessed with Bloody Mary, which may have caused some of the fear. Every day, one time or another, we would mention Bloody Mary. One time I tried it in the bathroom and I heard the unmistakable tone of an old music box coming from the mirror. I had been home alone. Even now, I have no mirrors in my room. No reflective photo frames, no uncovered windows. The only mirror I have in my home is in my bathroom. I close the door whenever possible, but I always have that brooding sense that I closed it this morning. I don't know why I feel that way, but I do. Luckily for me, I rarely have to walk close to it throughout the day, so my fear is rarely pushed to an actual scream. Because of my fear of mirrors, I naturally look unkempt. I never bothered to put on makeup. I wash my face in the shower, never closing my eyes for fear of seeing something in the mirror, or something from the mirror. For a girl, I look quite pathetic. Being made fun of for ugliness was fine, as long as I could keep away from that horrifying mirror. I heard something about mirrors that terrified me. If you looked at your reflection in darkness for more than 10 seconds, your face would distort. I found this entertaining enough to where I almost tried it. I couldn't work up the nerve to close the door, so I scratched it. No sir, I wasn't gonna tempt whatever was behind that facade. One day I was actually going to look in a mirror for a good, long time. I will admit that I would occasionally look in the mirror. It would be near impossible not to, but with the door open, lights on, and I would just think about whatever was needed to be done that day. However, today was different. I was going to face my fears. I think that is the correct term. I'm having trouble thinking correctly. I almost had second thoughts about doing it, since I'd been thinking about it all day. However terrified I was, I knew I had to do it. I turned my hallway light on, walked in the bathroom, shut the door. I let out a huge sigh, putting my hair back behind my ears, staring deep into my own horrified eyes. I put my hand on the light switch. Just as I was about to turn off the light, I knew something was wrong. My face looked scrawnier. I'm normally pretty chubby for my height, but my reflection was about the size of a 120-pound woman. I eyed it carefully and accidentally flicked the light off, even though I hadn't moved my finger. I tried to flick the light on with one hand, but to no avail. With my right hand, I frantically tried to open the door, but it was jammed. I tried breaking it down, but I couldn't. I didn't look at the mirror. I knew it had something to do with it, but I had no idea what. I sat down, a ridiculous amount of crazy-minded voices filling my head. I grabbed my head, rolling directly underneath the mirror, only being shielded from its view by the sink. I'm pretty sure I fell asleep or fainted, since my light had either blown or I don't know what, and I was in almost complete darkness. However, I could still faintly see, even with no light source visible. I wondered how long I would be in here. What if I had to look in the mirror? I decided that maybe that was the best course of action. I had my back to the mirror, took a deep breath, and turned around. Nothing was in it. I looked in close. I reached up an unsteady hand and touched it. It was ice cold. My hand went numb from touching it. After a moment of shaking my hand, I glanced back. Still nothing. The perfect reflection of my bathroom. I looked under my door. Oddly bright, despite little light going into the bathroom. Something weird was going on. I reached under the door, but my hand went ice cold once more. I sighed and laid back down. I was tough. I wasn't going to cry. I fell asleep once more. When I woke back up, my back ached. However, it wasn't as noticeable as the mirror. Someone was in it. It was almost like looking into a window. I got up and stared into it. The lights were on, the door showing a hallway behind it. It was a man, a little unshaven, talking to a police officer behind him. Didn't show up for work this morning. I got worried. Alice always told us when she wasn't going to be there, so I naturally got worried. She's been gone a week, right? Yeah, a week. It only seemed like a few hours. Wait, how was I seeing this? My name was Alice. My coworker. I hit the mirror once. Help, I said. He looked unfazed. I got both hands and started pounding on the mirror. Help, help. He turned to the police officer. It's a creepy mirror, ain't it? I guess. Well, we better leave. She might show up soon. I watched them leave through my bathroom, through my hallway. I was inside my own mirror. That was when I noticed my coworker's phone that he had left in the bathroom. I live in the middle of nowhere, so I don't have any signal. He's going to be back soon to get his phone. Then I'll be trapped. Just help.
This happened around 3 years ago, when I started living alone. I moved into a really nice place. It was a corner apartment on the top floor. I loved it. My balcony was south-facing, and the windows were huge, which made for some awesome views. There was one issue though. The partition between my balcony and next door's. It wasn't very high or wide. There were big gaps between the walls and the partition as well. I could see into next door's balcony, and I guess they'd be able to do the same. Also, it didn't look that safe. Anyone could just break it down or climb it. I guess that the partition had to be like that in case of an emergency. I didn't like it all that much though. The rent was cheap, and the building was old, so I didn't care. Typical for a single man, I suppose. Now, I love all things scary, and I have a vivid imagination, so I would creep myself out imagining someone staring at me through the gaps. I didn't know why my mind did that. It never happened, by the way. The only time I'd ever seen the neighbor was an awkward interaction when we were doing our laundry at the communal laundry machines at the same time. One night, I came back from a night out drinking with my work colleagues and it was quite late. I was really tired and wanted to do nothing but sleep, but I then realized I had no clean clothes for work the next day. It couldn't be helped. I had to get the washing done. I felt like an idiot and a really terrible neighbor, since it was going to make a lot of noise with me going back and forth to the laundry room. When the laundry was done, I went to put out all of it on the clothesline to dry outside. It was a cold night, but there was enough wind to dry my clothes. As I was walking to the balcony door, a thought came creeping back into my mind. Is someone going to be out there, hiding, staring at you? For some reason, I imagined a woman soaked in blood. When I saw her face in my mind's eye, I shuddered. I knew that there would be no one out there, though. How could there be? It was just my imagination, though, right? I stepped out onto the balcony and forced myself to look through the gaps into the partition to put my mind at ease. There was no one there. Relieved, I went about my business, but then stopped in my tracks when I heard something. The sound of something scratching. It was very jaunty in the quiet of the night, especially since my imagination was running away with me. The scratching sound was loud. I wondered if it could perhaps be a hanger in the wind. I listened a little closer and realized it could not be a hanger scraping against something. It didn't sound metallic. It sounded like someone scratching their nails on a piece of wood. A horrible, chilling wind had begun to blow, and despite the cold, I realized I was sweating. I hated that I scared myself. I told myself that it was just my neighbor, and they were just out on the balcony at the same time I was. I then looked for myself through one of the gaps in the partition, and I noticed that the lights were off. The strange scratching sound continued. I was standing there thinking, at the age of 30, I had finally experienced something paranormal. The thought profoundly frightened me. I knew that I would have to turn and pass the gap in the partition to return to my apartment. It was like some horrible test of courage. I turned to go back inside, and I knew the second I turned towards the gap, I would see something. Perhaps that woman. It sounds like I'm making something out of nothing, but there really was something strange out on the balcony at night. The vision of a blood-stained woman leapt to the forefront of my mind again. I hated my imagination. Why was the image so prominent? How long did I stand there frozen, unable to think of anything beside the image? 5, 10 minutes? I couldn't tell you. However long it was long enough for me to realize that the scratching sound had stopped. The balcony was now silent. I felt relieved, and I blamed myself for overthinking. I was working myself up over nothing. Perhaps there was no ghost, no neighbor hiding. Maybe it was just an animal, or a gust of wind. I had talked myself down from overreacting, and just as I was mentally telling myself off for watching too many horror films, I heard a large thud against the partition. It was horribly loud. My heart stopped for a moment. Someone was there. They had to be. My intuition was right. My eyes were then fixed at the location of the sound, and I couldn't move. I couldn't see anything through the gap. That is when I saw a jet-black hand slowly wrap its hand around the outside of the balcony partition, and a head slowly crept around the corner and stared at me. I couldn't see through its hair in the darkness of the night, but it was there. It was horrifying to realize I wasn't alone, after all my suspicions. It was staring at me. It was so horrible. I burst into my room, pulled the door shut and locked it and closed the curtains. I left my apartment and stayed with a friend that night. I don't think I returned to my place for at least a week. Thank goodness for good friends, huh? He even went back to my place to retrieve some things. Even though it felt so real, I still try and tell myself it could have been some sort of hallucination. The horror of having your worst fears confirmed in the dead of night is something I wish upon no one. Or perhaps the hallucination theory is easier and more comforting to believe, or perhaps just makes the incident easier to forget. Days or weeks after that night, I forget which. I went to speak with my neighbor. His son was at university, and he told me that in the past he had complained to the building management. He said it sounded as if people were on his balcony every night. He thought it was someone trying to break in, but he couldn't be sure, as there was never anyone there. It was almost comforting to know that I wasn't alone in my experience. I thought my experience was bad, but the neighbor seemed to have had it worse. Whatever was going on was on their balcony after all. That's as far as my story went. All I can tell you is I left the apartment and haven't lived in an apartment with a balcony since, as these experiences haunt me to this day. About 2 years ago, I had a quite nice and strange When I was in the 4th grade, I went to a pretty small charter school. I loved it so much. I loved every teacher I had. Our cafeteria was fairly small and we didn't have a real kitchen since the cafeteria doubled as the library. So we just got food shipped in from a caterer. Anyway, I knew almost all the cafeteria people because they were the other teachers and some of the office ladies. We had recess aides that cleaned up the tables and everything. One day there was a new guy there. He was tall. Maybe that's just because I was small. He had glasses, short hair, and seemed pretty built. He was cleaning up tables and weirdly staring at the children. You know, that just horrific feeling you get when you know something is very bad and shouldn't be happening. I had that feeling. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I felt like I was going to throw up. As a child, I was very trusting and never felt this way before. It was only with this man. I ignored it, and just kind of observed him with my friend Abigail at the time. For about 2 weeks this kept happening. I'm going into the lunchroom, eat as fast as I could, and try not to make eye contact with the dude. Also, just some more detail. After we were done eating, we had to clean up our trash and then raise our hand so an aide could tell us if we could leave or not. So one day I'm done with my lunch. My friend and I raise our hands, and I'm praying he's not the one to tell us to go because I hated looking at him, as he always made me feel terrible and on edge. But lo and behold, he looks right in our direction. Usually aides are fairly lenient and would just nod their heads from across the room, but he walks slowly over to us, gets an inch away from the table, pulls out his rag and wipes it. "You left a lot of crumbs." We just stared at him because what do we say? It was his job to clean up the crumbs. We pick up our trash, he stares at us for what felt like forever and he says, "You two are so adorable. You're like sisters with pretty blonde hair and big eyes. Like dolls." I seriously thought I was going to vomit. Then he continued, "Do you girls play with dolls? I'm sure you do. I bet you like dressing them up, huh?" You might be thinking that that was harmless or what he said wasn't that bad, but he had never spoken to a kid before, at least that I had ever seen. He didn't even speak to the other aides. He finally told us we could go and waved after leaving. I told my mum the first time I saw him, but now I ran to my teacher's classroom and told her everything. That I always had a terrible feeling about him and what he said, and Abigail backed me up saying she felt the same way. The very next day I didn't see him, and never saw him again after that. That sounds drastic, but I'm glad the school took it seriously because who knows if a kid would have gone missing or hurt by him. I'm only assuming that's what happened, but I was relieved to never have to see him again.
Tree climbing had always been one of my favorite things to do when I was little. It didn't matter how tall they were. As long as they were trees, I could climb them. My personal record for reaching the top of a tree was 60 seconds, which probably isn't that impressive, but for me at the time, I was proud of that. I lived with my grandma back then, and I'd always climb this one tree in our front yard, then swing on it for hours. But one nightmarish incident made me stay away from trees from that point on. It started out like any other day. I went out to the front yard after breakfast, ready to do some climbing as usual, I kicked off my shoes and took off my socks since I was more adept at climbing while barefoot. Then I made my way up the tree trunk and grabbed onto the lowest branch I could. Closing my eyes, I decided to just dangle there in the air, enjoying the wind brushing against my face. After 5 minutes, I heard someone giggling below me. I looked down, and to my surprise, I saw an old woman with pale skin, dressed in a black gown, sitting at the base of the tree. At least, she looked like a woman. She was giggling while covering her face with her hands like she was playing peekaboo or something. Alarm bells should have been going off in my head right about now, but I was a very naive 8-year-old, so I didn't think she was dangerous. Instead of calling for my grandma, I asked her, "What's so funny?" while casually dangling from the branch above her. The woman looked up at me with her bloodshot eyes and smiled, like she was happy I started talking to her. Then her smile grew wider, revealing her razor-sharp teeth. "What's funny, my dear, is that in the next few seconds, I'm gonna snatch you right out of that tree like a juicy, low-hanging fruit, and then I'm gonna gobble you up from head to toe," she said with a soft giggle. My face went pale after hearing those words and seeing the woman's monstrous teeth. I was so scared that I just froze up, clinging to the branch a little tighter while my bare feet dangled above her head. Whoever this woman was, she clearly wasn't human. I snapped out of my daze when she stood up and began reaching for my legs with her inhumanly long arms. I quickly brought my legs up and over the branch, then started climbing for my life. The woman let out a sadistic cackle as she started climbing after me. Now, I was pretty confident in my climbing ability since I had 2 major advantages over her. I was smaller and I had bare feet. Also, you'd think she would have trouble climbing a tree at her age, but, surprisingly, she was on my heels within seconds. And I mean, she was literally snapping her teeth at my heels while I climbed, like some kind of animal. It took every ounce of concentration I had not to stumble and fall into her clutches. As I continued to climb, she'd say things like, "I'm gonna get you," and "You better climb faster, sweetie," just to scare me and make me lose my footing. But I just tuned out her words and focused on the climb. All I could hear were the soles of my bare feet slapping one branch after another as I moved with a sense of life-threatening urgency. But in spite of my efforts, I was still just a kid. So it didn't take long before I made my first mistake. While climbing, my foot slipped off a branch due to my state of panic and not getting a proper foothold on the tree. I quickly grabbed onto the trunk with both hands, then frantically moved my foot around, searching for a groove that my toes could rest on, to regain my footing. But there wasn't one. I was stuck. And in that moment, the woman didn't hesitate to try and bite my foot while it dangled in the air above her head. But thankfully, my fear kept me going and I managed to pull my foot back up in time. "So close! Almost had you there!" She'd laugh, enjoying the chase. "So close! Almost had you there!" She'd laugh, enjoying the chase. The woman suddenly got quiet, so I looked down to see if she was still there. But she was gone. Not a single trace was left of her. For a moment, I began to wonder if I'd imagined her. Suddenly, 2 large hands grabbed both of my ankles, pulling my feet out from under me and causing me to fall on my back. Before I knew it, I was hoisted into the air, dangling upside down by my feet. I frantically looked up to see the creature's horrifying face smiling down at me. I don't know how it reached the top before I did. I didn't even see it pass me. This thing's movements defied logic. "Told you I'd snatch you up," it said while licking its teeth. "Now to enjoy my prize." The creature then opened its mouth inhumanly wide, revealing hundreds of sharp teeth. It then slowly brought my feet up to its open maw, ready to devour me. I screamed at the top of my lungs as I kicked my legs frantically, trying to free myself, but to no avail. I was only saved when my grandma came outside after I screamed. The creature quickly dropped me before disappearing without a trace, almost as if it never existed. I got out of that tree so fast and ran straight into my grandma's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. I tried to explain to her what I'd seen, but she didn't believe me. Years have passed since then, but I'll never forget that thing's face for as long as I live.
Do any of you remember outdoor ed? If you don't remember or just plain don't know, I'll give you a brief rundown. Outdoor education, or ed for short, is a school camping trip that takes students to the woods where they can learn more about the outdoors. My Outdoor Ed's trip took me to the snow-infested mountains, and for the most part it was completely boring save for the occasional snowball fight. Then the last night occurred, and I will never forget it for as long as I live. Now before that night, I didn't have any trouble sleeping, but the last night, it was like something was wrong. At first I assumed it was just homesickness, first time away from my parents, you see. But then I looked to my cabin mates and counselor, and from the look on their face, I could tell they were feeling it too. It was a tense several minutes, and then something started calling our names. It was barely more than a whisper, but all of us heard it. The voice seductive, alluring. It made us want to go outside, but the small amount of common sense I had in the back of my head ordered me to stay put. Charlie. My counselor did not feel the same way and left the cabin to investigate. We could hear him yelling from outside. Come on, guys. This isn't funny. The kids are trying to sleep. I guess he assumed it was some sort of prank. After a few minutes of silence, he rushed back inside. There's someone out here. Stay inside. He grabbed something from his bag and left. Listen, this is your only warning. I'm armed, and if you intend to hurt these kids, I will shoot. There was silence, and I heard the loudest noise I'd ever heard. 2 consecutive bangs. I could hear the other counselors come outside and hear them talk. I can't hear what they say, but my counselor comes back and says that for the rest of the night we have to stay indoors. Eventually, I slept and drifted out. Next morning, as the students are boarding the buses to leave, we see police cars on the road and police officers talking to my counselor. He described it as something barely resembling a human, taller than 10 feet, with skin so pale you could mistake it for snow. It was all he could see before he fired and the creature ran off. Suffice to say, I've had nightmares about it and am now forbidden from going on any more camping trips. Now that I'm a bit older and a little bit wiser, my best guess is that it was a Wendigo. But this was Southern California, an unusual place for such a cryptid. Christmas Eve dinner at Burger King. Sounds innocent enough, right? Not my first choice, but I had to work late, and being Christmas Eve, it looked to be my best choice. I got finished working at 9 and had some coupons for Burger King, so that made my decision for me. When I got to Burger King, I noticed it was still open, but the dining room was shut down. The only way I could get something is if I went through the drive-thru. Only problem is I don't have a car. I tried to walk up to the drive-thru and place my order, but the compassionate young lady working the drive-thru wasn't having it. She told me if I didn't have a vehicle, I couldn't use the drive-thru. I became rather aggravated and began saying things I'm not proud of. At that moment, an older woman wearing shining armor appeared on the scene and offered me to jump into her car and order my food. At first, I turned her down, not wanting to be a bother, but after some convincing, I decided to accept her help. And after ordering my food, it took so long to get it that I missed my bus and got upset. So the nice woman offered me a ride home, and I kind of felt off-put by the offer and declined. She was persistent, but at the same time nice, and convinced me to take her offer. Mind you, I am a 250-pound 30-year-old man and really didn't feel that threatened by a 50-year-old woman. If the circumstances were different, I would have not taken the ride. After I told her where I lived, we proceeded home. About 5 minutes from my house, she made a wrong turn. I explained that I lived the other way, and that we needed to turn around or let me out here, and I could walk the rest of the way. It was then that the woman's demeanor changed, and she told me that she could not let me spend Christmas Eve alone, and that she was taking me to her house. I told her I needed to get home immediately to let my dog out, and that I would be fine. The woman then tried to entice me with cocaine and liquor at her place, but since I'm in recovery, I told her I wasn't interested. She refused to turn around or let me out, and started to drive strangely, not stopping at stop signs, and I'm not gonna lie, my mind was racing and I began to sweat. I knew that I could physically overpower this woman, but what awaited me at her house? I also felt bad about hurting her after all her kindness, but I had to get away before her house, and I didn't know where that was. So I didn't have much time to find out. Then all of a sudden, luckily, the car in front was stopped at a stop sign, and across from it was another stopped also. She had to slow down almost at a stop at this point to where I made my break, jumping out of the car, still moving and leaving my food in the car and taking off running. As I was running, she stopped, got out of the car, and began to try and talk to me into getting back in with her. That just wasn't an option. I didn't know what her motives were or who she was, but I knew I wasn't willing to risk my life over it. I ran all the way home and made sure I wasn't followed. What would have happened to me if it was 2 years earlier and I was still doing drugs and drinking? Her offer of cocaine and booze would have probably worked. Kidnapping, murder, sex trafficking, organ trading, or something else. Being a man, the thought of the vulnerability most women face every day was so foreign to me that I now understand the fear most women face. I really feel this nice woman had a nefarious purpose. Thinking about it, the ruse of such a non-threatening bait would be perfect to lower the guard of a prospective victim. Any thoughts would be appreciated. I never went to the cops because I thought they might not believe me or look down on me for being scared in this situation. What if, by not reporting this, someone else ends up hurt? Or whatever didn't happen to me, happened to them. When I was 17, I worked at an indoor pool as a lifeguard. I had 2 very strange encounters while working at that establishment, but the one I am about to share certainly takes the cake. First, a little foreshadowing, as the details are important. I was dating a boy at the time who was chill as hell, and he had an absolutely crazy older brother. The way we met was mad. I was hanging out in said boyfriend's room,
the small Italian-style fast food dive just off of campus,
and one of his cousins bursts into the room and asks me to come to the bathroom immediately. A look of shock clearly plastered on his face. I got up and joined him outside the small bathroom. The thing that sticks with me the most was that I saw blood everywhere, and I mean everywhere. "You're a lifeguard, right?" the man bleeding over the sink asked me. Yeah, I replied sheepishly. "So you know first aid then?" "Of course." I don't know why, but then I kicked into training mode and began cleaning his bloodied hands to find the source of the flow. We'd sat in silence mostly. I was afraid to ask many questions. I cleaned and bandaged him up to the best of my ability. Later I found out from my boyfriend that his brother had been drinking that night, along with doing some other drugs. Apparently he got pissed off and went into full rage mode and destroyed his apartment with his bare hands. Crazy, I know. Well, one day, a pretty long time after, he saw me outside while I was over one night and approached me. I was in my car adding water, and he then proceeded to tell me he really appreciated what I did for him that night, and he had to repay me somehow. He went to my driver's side and tucked something in between the door and seat and said, "Have a good night," and that was that. I was busy with my car issues and forgot about the encounter. I honestly thought it was just some good bud, but I was wrong. It was a meat cleaver. Back to the pool now. It was late fall or early winter, therefore the pools were never too crowded this time of year, and you get to know the regulars. I was befriended by a boy maybe a few years older than me, called Jack. We had a lot in common, and despite him looking like a creep, we got on well enough. He never gave me any reason to fear him. We mostly talked about music, and he commented on how mature I was for my age compared to other girls. Again, this never alarmed me, because I heard this a lot from people. 10 years on, I still do. One day it was freezing and pouring down with rain. My shift was ending soon, and Jack had mentioned he had to walk home as his ride bailed on him. I said, "The hell you are? You live close? I can give you a lift." He agreed to wait for my shift to end and hitch a ride. He told me where he lived, and I was familiar with the community. I got changed into my clothes. I wore silly goth clothes from Hot Topic. The pants were parachute and clasped, with a snap button and zipper. We left, and I headed to the community he said he lives in. As we approached, I put my blinker on, and he said, "No, keep going." Boom. Red flag. The only thing ahead past this development were fields and the occasional farmhouse. I spoke up and said, "Dude, you said you live here." He responded that it was only a little past here and that he used it as a landmark. Okay, fine. We kept going about 3 minutes, and after he said, "This is me on the left." I was somewhat relieved to see it was a cluster of wealthy-looking houses maybe 3 acres apart. Better than the center of nowhere, I suppose. We pulled into the driveway, and I noticed there were no cars, which I guess makes sense since he did say his ride bailed. I put the car in park, and he pulled my parking brake up. "What the?" I tried to say, but I couldn't because the creep grabbed my hair and forced a kiss on me. I forgot to mention this fool had a grill so yellow, he made Big Bird look white. Anywho, I was trying to bite him, pull away, and slap him, but he was much stronger than me. He forced his hand to the opening of my pants, and the snap betrayed me, and I was reaching to my left at this point, remembering Big Brother's gift. I screamed and told him to get off me, and whipped that sucker out so fast and slammed it into my steering wheel. It sliced into it all the way to the metal. The look on his face was priceless. He started to mumble and panic, not making much sense, and then he reached for my hand, so I pulled the cleaver out and went blindly swung it. I had no other option. I nicked the part of his hand where the thumb joins, and he yelped out in pain. "Get the hell out!" I screamed, the words trembling and barely able to escape me. He hesitated, but starting to get out, and started cussing me, calling me all kinds of colourful words. I was shaking like a leaf at this point and holding back tears. He slammed my door. I put the car in reverse and tore out the driveway. Then wham, I hit something. Hard enough to stop my car. Shit. I destroyed the mailbox. In my terror, I misjudged the driveway. He came running at me, hands up and screaming at me like, "What the hell?" My window was down and I heard him say, "You're gonna pay for that." I screamed, "Shove it up your butt," or something equally colourful, and got the hell out of there. I drove straight to my boyfriend's, visibly shaken and crying at this point, and told him everything. I only saw Jack once more at a gas station late at night, and he just glared at me. I was with friends and begged them to leave. Haven't seen him since. So Jack, let's not meet again.
When I was in 7th grade, I wasn't stupid. I knew when someone was watching me, and I definitely wasn't ugly. I played soccer, went to the gym, stayed in shape, and I looked good. I just wish I had loved myself a little more back then. But that's besides the point. I was very obviously underage because my face looked about 10. I always had a backpack on, and my school was directly next to the Starbucks where this creep worked. I had just moved, and unlike my old school, this one wouldn't let students inside early, which was awful because school started at 8:40, but my mom dropped me off at 7:10 on her way to work, meaning I had to sit outside for over an hour in Texas heat, humidity, or pouring rain. So, to avoid that, she started dropping me off at the Starbucks right next to the school. And this wasn't unusual at all, since tons of middle schoolers and even elementary school kids from the connected campus would go there. So, if you saw a young girl with a backpack, it was extremely obvious she wasn't an adult. I've always been really awkward in new environments, so the first day I went there, I was too embarrassed to take up a seat inside that a paying customer might want, so I sat outside alone in the sweltering heat for an hour. And I regret that decision so much, because that's when he noticed me, the creep, and he saw me sitting there by myself and realized I was an easy target. He came outside and started talking to me, complimenting my long hair and my beautiful face. And when he asked for my name, I told him I wasn't comfortable giving it. And after that, it felt like he made it his personal mission to find out who I was. Over the next few days, I eventually worked up the nerve to sit inside, and that's when things got worse, because he wouldn't leave me alone. He started making me free drinks without asking, talking to me constantly, hovering around me in a way that made me feel guilty and sick at the same time, because I hated accepting free things, and I didn't like the attention. And I could tell he wasn't just being nice. It felt like he was hitting on me, which made everything so much more uncomfortable. About a month in, I even wrote in my journal about him, because it was bothering me that much. I wrote about how the new school felt too new and too weird, and how this worker wouldn't leave me alone. How he kept making me drinks and talking to me, and how I felt guilty and sick, and I specifically remember one day where he took it even further. I walked into Starbucks, and he was cleaning up while controlling the music, and as soon as he saw me, he started singing, badly, about me, about what I was wearing, about my long hair like I was Rapunzel or something, and people were literally watching. And he had already made my drink before I even ordered it, because he knew my schedule like clockwork, and I felt so exposed and uncomfortable that instead of sitting where I usually did, facing the counter, I sat with my back to him so he couldn't see my face, and when it got too busy, I just snuck out. The guilty part I wrote about came from how I was raised. I was always called spoiled by my older sister. So I got used to saying no to things people offered me, especially free things. But with him, I couldn't avoid it, because he would just hand them to me anyway. Then things escalated even more, because he started asking people about me, trying to figure out who I was. And one day my social studies teacher came in wearing his lanyard and ID, and after making his drink, the creep pointed at me and asked for my name, and my teacher just casually said it and left, not realizing anything was wrong. And the next day when I walked in, the creep called out to me using my name. But he said it wrong, like Jakota. And my stomach dropped because I had never told him that. And then as I was leaving, he called me over to the counter and pushed a big hot drink toward me, which confused me because I had already had mine and I didn't even like hot drinks. And when I asked what it was for, he told me to give it to my teacher as a thank you for telling him my name. And I remember feeling completely frazzled and uncomfortable and just off, so I gave the drink back and left. By that point, I was genuinely scared of him, even if I didn't fully admit it to myself. And I even wrote in my journal in this dramatic way about how everyone has that one person they'd do anything for, One person who makes them question their sanity, and one person they'll never admit they're scared of. And for me, it was the Starbucks worker. After that, I became hyper-aware of him. I would watch where he was, avoid eye contact, keep my hood up, and only go into Starbucks on Wednesdays because I figured out he didn't work that day. And I remember one time after school, I saw him outside talking to two women who were sitting and smoking, and he was just standing over them smiling. And even though they were adults with kids, something about the way he carried himself still made my skin crawl, and I stayed near the window, trying not to be seen while also not being able to stop looking at him. The entire time, he only ever treated me this way. No one else. And he knew I was a minor, which made everything worse. He constantly told me I was beautiful, kept giving me free drinks that he was clearly paying for himself, probably spending over $100 on me over time. And at one point, he even asked if I wanted to know his name. But he wasn't wearing a name tag. And I didn't say yes, because I didn't want to give him the wrong idea or make him think I was interested, even though the only reason I wanted to know was so I could warn other people about him. Even after that year ended, when I was in 8th grade, I still saw him sometimes in passing. And every time I did, I felt that same fear and discomfort all over again, like I was being watched. And all I could think, every single time, was that I never wanted to see him again.